Hello, hello, hello. So, I am making a better OpenUTAU tutorial. The last one I made really wasn't an OpenUTAU tutorial, to be honest. It was just showing my tuning process. It skipped a whole bunch of stuff, and I've recently realized that there isn't a lot of recent information about how UTAU works, and I've never seen someone break it down from the very base level all the way up to using OpenUTAU yet. So I'm going to try and do that today. I'm not going to cover how you make a bank. I'm not going to cover AI banks because I have not a lot of experience with AI banks, and honestly, there's already a great tutorial out there by, I think, Ufire, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, about making banks that works perfectly well, and it's very recent and it's very well made. So the info I'm about to give, especially about OpenUTAU specifically, is very quickly going to become outdated, probably because it's constantly being worked on, it's constantly being updated. OpenUTAU supports a whole ton of languages. I'm just going to be using the English installation. It supports the running on Mac devices as well, but that's a little bit more convoluted, and there are current resources, although not video tutorials, on how to set that up. It will mostly work on Mac the same way it does on Windows. The thing that will change is resamplers. The other thing, there are plenty of resources already out there. I know that people like to have a video tutorial though, so I thought I'd just sort of bring my knowledge together in one place. So, I'm going to run through how OpenUTAU works, and this first section is some very base stuff, and a lot of it overlaps with how UTAU works. You can see my lovely, lovely MS Paint window. Right, so the most important thing to start thinking about is the bank, which I'm just going to draw here. There's a little quirky little anime creature, but I have one of these. Yeah, this is our bank, right? Inside of a bank, we have the auto. The auto.ne's purpose makes more sense when we have the oopsies. But I'm just going to call them the WAV files because they usually are WAV files, but they can be different formats, and that's usually when it runs into trouble. So what the auto.ne does is it's a list of a bunch of timing flags, basically. So you have, for example, let's say this is a CV bank for the sake of simplicity. In the auto, you will have a line that says r.wav. So it's referring to this file, as you can see. So this is the file name, and then it has an alias. Alias. I think you pronounce it alias, my bad. An alias, in this case, will be ah. Between the equals sign and the first comma is the alias. Then there's a bunch of timing. It'll be 6 numbers. So an auto.ini will have one of these lines for every alias in the bank. Now, if it's just CV Japanese, that's going to look pretty similar to your standard hiragana table. But it does get more complicated with other formats later. Right. So this is the core of a bank. And it only needs one more thing to work, debatably, which is the character.txt, or text. This is just a simple text file that stores the name of the bank and something called image, and it leads to like the icon. The only thing this file needs to do is name. If you're making like your own bank and you don't have a picture, no stress, just write the name, and that's all it has to be. Super, super simple. So what OpenUTAU has is an extra file which it will automatically generate if it doesn't already have one. But some banks do have a custom one, which is also nice, is a character.yaml. I recommend getting Sublime Text Editor because it can open these no problemo. This is OpenUTAU specific. The character.yaml has a few extra things. It kind of acts as a stand-in for the prefix map, which we'll get into, but it just stores some extra information about the bank. It also, you can set up a portrait image like in SynthV, where the funny UTAU bank stands on the portrait while they stand. Yeah. So the other things, which you probably won't ever have to worry about, but I will mention them anyway, there are frequency files. The frequency files will be in the same folder as the voice files. Now, technically all of this could be in one folder, but generally it's a good idea to keep the stuff down the bottom in its own folder. You will need copies of this for every pitch that the bank has. Now, most banks, okay, like half of banks, I don't know, are mono-pitch, which means they'll only have one set of these. But if you wanted to have like a low R and then a high R, you would need them in separate folders. The other thing that goes in the root is a prefix, prefix dot map. I think you're supposed to have one, but I've also seen banks work without them if they don't need one. But what this does, God, this looks so ugly, is the prefix.map basically has a format where it's got the names of all the different notes from high to low written down the left, and then there's 2 columns, and this is the prefix column, so usually I see people not use this, but it can happen, and the suffix column. So if, for example, we had R at the pitch C4 and then R at the pitch A4, we would basically have to add a little something on the end of the alias here. It would go in here. It would be like A4. The prefix map would look like this. It would have nothing below because the normal one doesn't have a suffix. And once you get above a certain pitch, usually just the pitch of the recording is the easiest way, there's A4 on every column. The good news is if you download a bank that has multiple pitches, chances are it's already going to work in OpenUTAU, no problem. All right, the format. So this is CV Japanese. I haven't done a great example, but for example, the next file might be ka, and that's because it's got a consonant and a vowel, and that's it, KA. There are other formats like VCV and CVVC, but VCV, for example, is like R, because this is like KA. So you see how these map upwards? Vowel, consonant, vowel. CVVC is a little bit more complicated, but ka, k. And then this would probably lead into another sound with a K, like a ku or something. Very, very complicated. Don't have to worry about it. There's actually a phonemizer which can handle all of the Japanese formats now, so the days of having to figure out what format the bank is in the past. Resamplers. Basically, these 3 types of thing here are all that's involved in producing the sound. Let's say you wanted to say ka. Standard UTAU, you would write these in, and then you'd have to convert this to hiragana and then convert that back to whatever format the bank is in. Luckily, the new phonemizer for OpenUTAU does this for you. So it's going to spit out, let's say it's CV Japanese again for simplicity. It's going to spit out a modified thing that'll look like this. I swear I will open the program eventually, it's just for the sake of demonstration. It'll look like this. It goes, I know what you mean. You want ka. And then it'll take this information and look in the auto for that alias, whatever. It'll look for the R. It goes, I found it. It'll look for the card. It'll find it somewhere in the long list and go, I got it, you know? Then it's going to look at the files that it's trying to draw from, and as long as they're both there and named correctly, like it is in the auto, and then it looks at the frequency file, which basically is a map of how your pitch changes when you say in this case. And there's one for every audio file. And it looks at that and it goes, okay, now that I have that, I can flatten it out into a straight, clean pitch. So the resampler is kind of the one that does all of this stuff. Once it has that information, it then fixes the timing. So the auto has a bunch of parameters. Let me mark them in blue. You don't have to know the specifics, but it's like here, here, somewhere here, here, here. It finds those 6 numbers, which will show up on this envelope, and then it squishes and stretches the audio file to match the time, because you might have said for a very short time, but this note might be like, I don't know, 3 hours long. So it has to know how to stretch it, loop it, change it to get it to sing at the right timing. I'm going to be real, I'm not really well versed on how the resampler works, because there's another thing called a wavtool. It just takes the resampler's output and stitches it into WAV, which are audio files, to play into your lovely human ears. That's the final step in the process, is the WAV tool. Now, there aren't as many options for WAV tools as there are resamplers. It's kind of got a more simple job. OpenUTAU comes with one preloaded in, 1 or 2, simple and convergence. Look, honestly, I might have broken ears, but I find most of them sound pretty similar. I've heard that wavtool for VCV is a really good one. This is a bit outside the scope of this tutorial, but good mixing is going to make more difference than a good wavtool. They're all pretty good. Anyway, so you can see straight away that in this section of where it makes a sound, there are very many opportunities for things to go wrong. You could have an error, let's mark them with green for positivity and confusion. You could have an error in here, which makes the timing broken over here. You could have the alias that you put into the note not exist in the auto, right? Like if you wrote beans into the Japanese phonemizer, it's not going to know what to do with it, right? your frequency file could be messed up. And even if the frequency file is really bad, it's still going to try and render it. It'll just sound like absolute dog shit. So I'll show you how to fix a broken frequency file later. Your actual audio files could be really noisy or have things wrong with them. You can see why many of these things could go wrong. But most of the time, if you've downloaded a bank from the internet and it's got a good reputation, it'll be fine. And most of what you'll have to actually worry about in practice is these notes here. So you might be wondering, why are you telling me all this? It's because it's actually important to know how these things work so that when something breaks, you can go through the process of trying to fix it. It might actually be time to go over to OpenUTAU. No, I can still use MS Paint longer. So the character YAML is kind of important. So if you have multiple pitches, let's say you have a standard bank, label it like this because I don't want to write anything anymore. It's a CV Japanese bank recorded at C4 and B3. The worst pitch distribution ever. This is a terrible idea, but you know what I mean. And then you have another bank. It's hard to draw stars, okay? It's recorded at B3 and B4, and it's supposed to be like a really strong shout bank, and you want to be able to swap between the two of them without tearing your eyes out. You'll have to give OpenUTAU this information. And why this is important is because look at these two, B3 and B3, they're the same. How is the program going to know which one you mean? So usually you get something on the end like an S, and it has to be in the alias, so it has to be written in here, this space here before the comma. And if you're not sure what it's supposed to be, sometimes you're lucky and it's listed on the website of the bank. Usually it's not, and you have to open up the AutoINI for the relevant, like each one of these will be its own folder. So you have to go in and open up the AutoINI in a text editor and see what's here, and then you can put it into here. But that's only if you want to use a multi-pitch, multi-append bank. You might be wondering, hey, what if the autos just have like the same alias, like what we call duplicates? So like, what if there is no S? Setparam is really good to do this because you can just tack it on the end. There's also another one I saw which does this for multiple at a time, because setparam you have to open up this one and then open up this one. But I found this cool little utility that does it for both at once, or like as many as you need. But it's entirely in Japanese, and I don't want to do that to you. Anyway, there should be tutorials out there on how to add a suffix alias, and it's kind of a niche problem, so I wouldn't be mad if you just came into the Discord and asked, hey, how the hell are you supposed to do this? Because it's pretty niche. Alright, let's open up the program so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to be real with you, I can't be bothered reinstalling this whole program just to show you what it looks like. Other thing you can do, which is optional, but I also really recommend it, is to change your locale. This is not your computer language or computer time zone, this is something a bit more specific. And it doesn't actually affect OpenUTAU that much. Mostly it affects when you unzip files, or if you use setparam or RUMOURS or some other program that is about the same antique as the original UTAU. It tends to break without changing this. So you want to go into the control panel. This is for Windows 10. I think there's a different process for Windows 11. So you want to go to region and then administrative. And then language for non-Unicode programs, change that to Japan. That's all. Once you're done, as you can see, my computer is still in English. That shouldn't change. Make sure you do that before you install like RUMOURS, setparam, or anything like that. Back to OpenUTAU. Once you do that, you can just like download the program. It's on GitHub. You want to download the release. It doesn't matter which release you download because it has an automatic update system. So every time you open it, it checks for an update and you can update it on the spot. So the other thing you need to worry about when you download it, you're going to get like a zip file and you need to think, where am I going to put this? Because if you just leave it in your downloads, it's not going to work. It needs to be in a place where it feels loved. I don't actually know why it's like this, it just is. So I have mine in my root folder on my secondary drive, and if you don't know what I just said, put it on the desktop. I have it in its own little folder, OpenUTAU, it's all sitting in here. When you unzip the zip file, it's just going to plump out a bunch of this shit. Like, I know it looks like a lot, it is all important. They're not very large files, so don't worry about it too much. There it is, that's the executable. Now, I understand you might not want to scroll through all this shit every time you need to get to your OpenUTAU executable, so I would... where did it go? Okay. You right-click it, and you create a shortcut. And once you have that shortcut, then you can wang that onto your desktop. That's usually the easiest way to do it. Oh, by the way, as a warning, when you extract it onto your desktop, put it in a folder on the desktop, not straight on there, because otherwise all of these files will spread everywhere and it makes a mess. It'll keep one backup of whatever you're working on, just in case it crashes or you don't save or something happens. There'll be a backup. It's not perfect, but it is better than what it was before, which was nothing. So the cache is it basically means when you render something out, it caches it, so you don't have to render it again. But every time you change the tuning or something, it has to make a new one, and so the cache can kind of build up over time. I'll show you how to clear that as well. See, it's only 45 meg at the moment. That's nothing. You want to clear it when it gets to like the 200 meg point. The logs can be really helpful if you have a really weird bug. Most of the problems that we have these days don't need to go to this level, but you might find that the Discord server people who are helping out ask to see the log. So the best thing to do is to delete all of the ones in here, start the program again, and do the behavior that produces the bug, and then send that text file into the Discord. If you've put it on the desktop and the account on your computer is named after you, you might want to go in and edit that out because that's personal information. But that's the only personal information it would store. Peripherals. This is I put this here. Can you tell? It's the only one that doesn't have a capital. You're not going to see that one. Plugins. So a lot of plugins for the original UTAU software, which are really handy, are not needed anymore. Like OpenUTAU will do these things for you. Some things, like frequency tracer, auto pitch writer, they aren't necessarily already in the program as a function, so you might want them to be there, but there's no guarantee they're going to work. To be honest, it's really hard to get these things working. They just don't work as well. But the good news is you usually don't need the ones that you're used to using if you're coming from a normal UTAU installation. So resamplers, you can get these online. Yeah, they're all different because they're so important in the process of making the bank sing. Which one you choose will have a big effect on how it sounds. There is no one size fits all, but there is a one size fits most, and that's MoreSampler. This thing is a beast. It can handle most of what you throw at it, but there's always edge cases. So that's why I have so many of these things. It's because sometimes a sample just doesn't agree with the resampler. And I'll show you how to set up all of them so that you can use them interchangeably when you're tuning, which is really handy. The other thing is the singers file. This is basically exactly the same as the voice file in the original UTAU. You just put your singers in here. If it's a zip file, it's not going to read it, so you can use that to archive things. Like, I don't want to delete this, but I also don't want it taking up too much space. It's still 3.5 gigabytes. Anyway, so all of these are UTAU banks, and they have the titular... Oh god, this is a really bad example. Let me find one that's not so scary. Oh god. They have the titular character.text, character.yaml. You'll find a blank auto in the base section here. Usually there's no other WAV files, but they're here. You can see all of the parts are sectioned into folders. The WAV files are here. The frequency files are here. These are the ones with no logo. You can't open them. Believe me, I've tried. And then each of these has an auto file in it. And I find the quickest way to get to that is to make sure you haven't selected anything and just hit type up the top here. Sometimes that doesn't show up, so go to view, sort by type, and it'll be up here near the top. And then you can open it and look at all the lovely contents that might be important. The title of the file, this is the alias here, as I was talking about before, and here are the numbers. I think it's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4... It's 5. I lied to you, I'm sorry. It's 5 numbers. No wonder I couldn't put all of them on my diagram. Anyway, okay, templates. This is like a project file, same as any other project file. The equivalent of a UST for OpenUTAU is a USTX. But what's important about templates is I'll show you in a second. It's what we call setting up a mystery for resolution later on. The wavtools, again, I just have MoreSampler in here. I don't even use it as a wavtool, I don't think. You can, but I don't. I don't have any extra ones like I was talking about before. I'm kind of blind to the wavtool community. So let's go back to OpenUTAU. But the first thing I would do when you have this screen showing in front of you is I would go File and New from Template. My template has most of the expressions set up, and it has some things set up that are really annoying to do every time. I'll put a link to this in the description. If you download it and throw it in your templates folder, it'll show up when you want File, New from Template, and then you can just click this. You see, nothing's really changed, but what it does will come in handy later. You have your tempo. Oh, you can just click it once? Oh, I've never realized. Okay, well, I'm learning too. You have your tempo markers up the top, so you can add tempo and time signature changes. and this is just a readout of where the thing is scooting along here. So you've got this plus button, this adds a track. Now each one of these tracks is a UST file, pretty much. So if you import like a UST file, it'll go up here, and if you import another one, I think it's supposed to go under. This is the volume slider. There are plans to let this go above 6 until up to like 12 or 24 or something, but for now it is stuck at +6. You can mute it, you can solo it so nothing else plays. This is the centering or panning, so you can move it left to right in the headphones. So you can just right click to set any of these back to their center value. Select singer. So I'm pretty sure that she comes with a already configured character.yaml, which is great. It saves a lot of work. She's got a sibling bank. See, lovely. They work great. What you have here is the phonemiser. So if you click here, it might say something different. You can see that this is the menu. We got general. This is where the Anunu phonemiser is for AI stuff. I don't touch it. You've got English ones, Spanish ones, French, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Polish, Brazilian, Portuguese, Russian, Vietnamese, and Chinese. These are all supported, and as you can see under each drop down are a bunch of different options. If you have a Russian CVC bank, you want to pick this one. But for now, we've got a Japanese bank. These banks are great, and they're configured to do like everything. But if you've got a Japanese bank, just in general, I think you can pretty much stick this one. Mycore made this phonemizer, the CVC and yeah, this one. You can stick it on any Japanese bank and it will pretty much just work. Here we have the renderer. So if you want to use resamplers, like I was talking about before, you want to hit classic. I highly recommend this because the built-in worldliner, it works on Mac and that's about all it's good for. It kind of doesn't sound very good. It's very fast, so if you have a very low-end computer that can't handle, like, I don't know, solitaire, you can use this, but in most cases I would recommend against it because it has a habit of crashing. The next thing we've got to do is you can't put notes in here, as you might have noticed, so you click to create a part. You can rename them. This is just for organizing sake, so if you have two parts like this and you export this as a UST, it's all going to be on the same track, and if they overlap, they're going to be treated like overlapping notes. So I just like to put one big one, but that's just me. So you can click these little notes. Let me move this. You can click these on the left to play the note. And then you can click and drag to draw a note. So I'm using the Magic Pen. I really prefer this, or sorry, the Pen Plus tool. I really prefer this to the standard one because it's just so much faster. So you have a note, and this phonemizer, as you can see, I've only put a single R, but it's already phonemized it correctly, which is to VCV, which is great. So when I hit space, she sings. Amazing. So the template I was talking about earlier, remember that thing that 2 times in a row I was like, it'll be useful later. It's useful. Yippee! Down here we have 5 little tabs. So these are, it's a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things. So up the top we have the curve expressions. You could only use these on worldliner and maybe some AI renderers. But if you see a curve behind it, it's meant to work on worldliner and it won't work on this. So if you choose one that won't work, it says expression not supported by renderer. So, okay, let's talk about the like not normal ones. So the things that are specific to OpenUTAU are voice color, which is basically changing the appends. So like I said, if we want a powerful version of this, we can shuffle it along here, and as you can see, this little thing is changing. This little grey box is pretty important because this is what it is asking to find in the auto. Like if I typed beans, you can see it's just kind of putting the lyric I put in there as a last ditch attempt, but this little envelope that was here before is gone, and if I hit play, it won't do anything because there's nothing to render. So the other thing you might notice is this little grey shape here, the waveform. That's just a visual representation, it doesn't really do anything, but you can see if I make this a bit shorter and then render again, it gets a bit shorter. So when you actually first open this up, you'll see this tips window. I'm not going to tell you how to close it because you need to read. But this basically tells you how everything in this works in terms of the keys and things. These are sort of viewing options, except snap. So this section up here is your tools. This is your select tool. This is your pen. This is your pen plus, which does everything. Because if you hold control, it turns into the select tool. If you hold right click, it turns into a delete tool. It's really handy. And if you're selecting and you hold control, you can drag for a box select and then like select multiple at once, which is also really handy. When you have a note selected, you can use the arrow keys to move it up and down. And then if you hold Control and move up and down with the arrow keys, it puts it up and down by an octave, which you can't really see right now. Like that. If you know what an octave is, if you're a big octave fan, I think you'll quite like that feature. Anyway, you might be thinking, oh, but the tuning, I like to tune. So we have the two modes from standard UTAU here that are both usable. I personally use the pink one, which is the dots, because when you copy and paste notes, it carries over. But there is the other one, which is the grey line. So if you wanted to do really specific pitch adjustments, you can drag with this tool. All of these tools, by the way, 1, 2, Control 2, 3, 4, 5, to choose between these. Really nice and easy. So the cool thing with this pitch thing is that it can get a little bit too shaky and too much detail, so you can just hold Control and then use the click button and swipe over it or very quickly to smooth it out, which is really cool, but I don't really use it very much. There's also a knife tool which splits notes in half, and you'll notice that it has added a little plus sign there, but we'll get to that. So as I said before, if I made a few pitch changes like this, and I copy-pasted it, you can see that the pink line has carried over, the pink edit here, but the actual pitch edits haven't. So if anything, if you like to edit with this like function, I would save it until everything is in the right place, because you cannot copy-paste it. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, when you have these, you can hold right click and swipe. So usually left click is add, right click is remove, and then control click has its own like special function. Usually that's how it works. Right, vibrato. It's gotta have vibrato. This little icon down here, if you click, turns on the vibrato. Then it's pretty much the same controls as it is in standard UTAU. Make it bigger, adjust the attack and release, the length, and here you can adjust the rate, and if you're insanely detailed, the phase as well. When I place a note, it's in like little chunks of length. This actually changes when you zoom out, so if you're zoomed out very far, the chunks get bigger, and you zoom in and the chunks get smaller, so it's going to let you edit depending on how zoomed in you are, if you're wondering how that works. I find that pretty intuitive, that works pretty fine. If you do want to change it, you can go up here, and I would leave it on auto, which is this like zoom function, but you can set it to auto triplet, just in case the song you're trying to make a UST for has triplets. If there's little gaps between the notes and you don't want them to be there, you can just click on the edge and it will snap them to the closest point. Super easy. The other thing you can do is you can hold Alt and slide this along, and it moves them both as imaged. I can't explain these things with words very well. So we have some other menus up here which I have been ignoring. Part lets you use plugins. Don't ask me why it's called part, I don't know. But if you want to use a plugin, make sure you have all the notes selected before you try and use plugins. As it says, it's experimental. Most of these I have in here do not work. So we go to notes. Load rendered pitch, this is a thing for AI banks only, you can ignore it. But if you know how AI banks works, you probably know what this does. Add tail will add little notes on the end of everything with a tail. So it adds to the ending phoneme, and it can also do that for R, for the end of breath. These are just little handy tools, they don't work for every bank. If you only want it to do that for certain parts, for example, if I did this here, it would do it for both of them. You can just select, and it will only apply it to what you selected. Move an octave up, move an octave down. I told you how to do this with the keyboard shortcuts, but just in case you forget, they're in here. Quantize makes them snap to the funny little grid lines if they aren't already. So usually when you bring a UST file in that you've downloaded off the internet, it's a good idea to run one of these, maybe both of these, because obviously it doesn't need it now, but sometimes there are really minuscule out of time spots that are really frustrating to go through and fix. So this will kind of snap them back into time. Reset pitch bends is pretty obvious. If you make a big change and you hit this, it snaps it back to normal. Good if you want to very quickly clear the tuning out of a UST. Same with reset all expressions, clear vibratos, reset vibrato, all of these 5 here, reset, clear, reset, they're all pretty self-explanatory. Reset phoneme timings. Oh, I forgot about that. So you can move them around. If you wanted the R to be longer, you don't actually have to edit the notes, you can slide this around. That reset function just resets that. Okay, so the other thing that they also call phoneme timings is these little dots on the front of the envelope you can move around. You'll see that the velocity flag, which you might be familiar with, will do this already, but you can also manually make the fade in really silly. This can be a way to fix some broken timings. Usually it's better to just fix it with the auto though. And convert PITD to pitch control points. That sounds like crazy talk, but it's just this grey thing. So that's all of the stuff in here. You probably won't use these very often, but it is good to know the quantized ones at least. Oh, so expressions. When it says expressions, that is OpenUTAU talk for flags. You can basically name them. What my template does is it adds in a bunch of flags that MoreSampler uses, as you can see down here, along with a few other things that I thought would be useful. You can also hit this cog here and edit the expressions here. So if you don't want to use my template, which is fair enough because it looks like a mess, you can make this yourself. The reason we use a template is if you don't use a template when you start a new project file, you have to do it all over again, which is not great. And I think there was talk about changing that because it's kind of annoying. Anyway, but all of these settings can look really confusing. I would recommend, if you don't know how to set up a certain flag, have a look in my template and see if it's in there already. So the way you do this is the same as before. Click to add, or in this case to change. You can slide it right to adjust multiple and right click to reset. If you want to change the default value, you can go in here and the default is currently set to 0. You can just edit this, hit apply, and it will change it. So if you find the first one, say you want it on like something really specific, 50, and then you hold shift, you can just drag it and it will set all of them to that value. You don't have to have them selected. Like so. Right, lyrics. If you want to enter lyrics, you double click on a note. It's going to show you a bunch of suggestions. I don't really use this very often, but it can be handy in some really edge cases. You can just type it in. As you can see, it says tab to go to the next note and shift tab to go back. The other way to do it is to select a section and go edit lyrics, and you can do it in here. You can turn off live preview if it's causing you a bit of lag. It should be fine for the most part, but you can type in different lyrics here, and then hit enter, and it will apply them. Note defaults. Now, I don't touch this, but the portamento changes the default pitch positions here. So if you go like snap and then reset pitch bends, you can see they're very small, and that way it sounds super auto-tuned. Yeah, when you do make a change here, if you have notes already in there, you have to go to notes and reset pitch bends to get the change to apply. This will erase any tuning, so be careful. The other thing is when you move the playhead up here, it does move it here. So you can have two parts running at the same time. So for example, if we write a bunch of notes on here and look in here, you can see them as ghost notes. So if you're trying to make a harmony, it's really easy to line them up. Okay, installing singers. Right, this is important. So I have all of my banks here already. Makes life easy for me, but you probably don't. So if you go to Tools and Install Singer, then it takes you to this, and you can basically go and find the zip file that you get when you download the bank. It will usually be one of these formats, and you click on it and hit open, and it's going to run you through the process. It's going to check if the encoding is correct, yada yada yada. Singers. This menu is really handy. So we have here the location button, super handy. If you lose track of where your OpenUTAU is located, you can hit location and it's going to pull up the file, and you can just work your way back to OpenUTAU here if you need to get to your logs file or whatever it is. You can select the different singers here to have a look at. You've got a list of all of the aliases in the bank. So a warning about this. If you pull in a bank that's like, oh, I don't know, a cheeky 5 gigabytes of size, it will just crash this window if you try to look at it. I'm definitely not mentioning it just because it happened to me, and it will never happen to you, but it happens sometimes. If this window is crashing all of a sudden, it's probably because you're trying to look at a bank that's a little too big. Edit in VLabeler is an interesting option. VLabeler is a program to adjust the auto file. I don't personally use it, end of story, but this will basically mean you can click on this and go edit in VLabeler, and it will pull up VLabeler. and let you edit this section. I find that it doesn't actually jump to this properly, so I don't use it. Edit subbanks. So this is where the prefix.map editing comes in. You might recognize this from the shitty diagram I drew earlier. Mine doesn't have anything going on because it's very simple. It's a monopitch CVVC. But if we look at Maria, for example, you can see that the suffixes are set up here already. So, and up here are the different colors. We call it colors. Usually it's called appends. Sometimes they're not even called that. It's just like different banks for the same singer, like a soft bank. This is where you sort of set it up on the OpenUTAU side of things. Combining multiple banks into one is a really kind of complicated process. So I would, if you were a beginner, I would kind of leave it alone for now and try to stick to banks that have it already set up, like these two. So you can click and hold shift and select and put a different suffix in and set it and change everything here. Set encoding. So if your bank has encoding issues and it has mojibakia, which means it looks like totally messed up, you can try changing these. If none of them work, then it's probably a deeper issue. Generate singer error report. So if something's wrong with a particular bank and we ask you, can we have the singer error report? There it is. Refresh just means if you made any changes to the files and you hit this, it's going to reload it again. So when you click on one of these, it's going to show you the whole audio file down here and the auto. So we've got a little rudimentary auto editor in here, WASD real gamer style to move around this editor. You can click with the left click to drag and right click to zoom in and out. That's so cool. I did not know that. I'm learning so much today. And then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to move these different parts. So once you make a change, like I did here, you have to hit save. And once you do that, it's going to update over here and change. See, it just reloaded down the bottom. And it's going to change how this sounds. I didn't make any significant change, so you won't actually notice it. But yes, this means that you can very quickly edit the auto of problematic samples. When you control click on this, it's supposed to pull up the relevant one in here, but for some reason it is not working right now. Anyway, that'll probably be fixed. The other thing you can do with these little alias things down here is you can double click them and edit exactly the alias. Like if you needed to change that to a dot, if that was something that the bank had. As you can see, this is not something that exists in the bank, so it just deleted it from the envelope, which is fair enough. And you can also right-click and swipe across this to get rid of it. So it's a little bit hidden, but if this file, for example, had a really bad frequency, so you can see this, I know it's really hard to tell, but this little white line down the bottom, that's what it thinks the pitch is. And some of them are broken. Like this doesn't look quite right, so you can right-click and say regenerate frequency and click one of these. Whichever one looks less like trash is probably the best, but you don't want to see stuff like this, like really bubbly, poppy, uppy, downy, like that's not... I'm doing a great job describing this. So you've got help. It's got a link right here to the OpenUTAU wiki. Brilliant. You can open the logs location, also really handy, that just brings you to the file. You can report an issue. I don't think many people use this. If you have a problem, I would go to the Discord and ask for help. The main principles of error reporting should be followed. You need to write down what you think should happen, what is instead happening, and the steps that people need to take to reproduce the error. Otherwise, you're not going to get very much help because without that information, it's not very useful. The other thing you can do is check if the same problem happens on a different bank or if the same problem happens on a different resampler. Those are really easy ways to narrow down what the problem actually is. Tools, clear cache. This is what I was talking about earlier. Once this gets like to too big of a number, clear it. If the program's starting to run slowly, clear this. Debug window. This is just a log thing that you can screenshot. If you don't want to send the text file, you can screenshot this and just send it to us. Obviously, it's not very accurate because it's working perfectly fine. Phonetic assistant. What? Oh, whoa, I didn't even know we had this. Oh, wow, okay. I'm just going to nerd out over this for a second. If you go to preferences, this test button is really good. If your bank isn't making any noise but everything looks fine, you can check whether the program actually has access to your headphones. If it doesn't, go find your relevant headphones and click on it and test it. Additional singer path. The voice banks is easily the biggest file size thing you're going to have to deal with. If you're a user of original UTAU, you can basically hit select and go find your voice folder wherever you have it, and it will just draw the singer information from there, so you don't have to move any of your banks over to the new one, which is really cool. I just have a separate path for file management problems. I found that in the past, this program would get really, really laggy, and splitting off half of my voice banks into a different folder and setting it under a different path made it so much faster. Okay, rendering. This is where we get into making sure this runs okay on maybe your like dad's 20-year-old laptop. So when you have pre-render off, it's acting like I've had it this whole time. I usually leave it on, but just because I have OBS today, I've decided to turn it off. It's not going to make it like magically faster, but if you're making little edits, it's going to start re-rendering it the moment you make a little edit, and that can be kind of annoying. Maximum render threads. It's probably best to just leave this on too, I'm going to be honest. Machine learning runner. Again, AI stuff. And the GPU, again, AI stuff, I'm not touching them. They work fine for me already. If you know what these things do, then you're welcome to change them. Appearance, language, so we've got this many languages that you can choose from for your interface, which is nice. They are constantly being updated, which also means they might have a few issues. Some things might not have received a language patch for the new updates, like little new menus and things. I'm sorry if that's the case. You're welcome to try and reach out to whoever's in charge of those language patches, and if you speak that language, to help translate if you want to. Again, that sort of happens through the Discord. We don't see it happen very often. It would be nice to see a bit more of that. Singer sorting order. You can also change the order in which it sorts your singers. Show portrait on piano roll. I think if I turn this on, yes, there she is. So you can see how it actually shows the picture. That's set up in the character.yaml. It's a little bit of a process to set it up yourself, but it's not too bad. And like I said before, Maria has the character.yaml set up already, and you'll see the portrait is a pretty clear indication that it's already set up. You can't just drag an instrumental in. I wouldn't do this. This is a terrible idea. I would just leave the audio on its own track. If you want to scroll around, it's Control, scroll to zoom, it's Alt, scroll to squishy. I have two scroll wheels, so I can just go sideways, but I think it's Shift scroll to go sideways. I forgot to mention. So if you want to change your resampler and wave tool, you have to hit the cog on the track, and then you can change the resampler and the wave tool. But I use multiple resamplers. Good thing I'm talking about this now because I've completely forgot. Oh yeah, be careful. When you open a project from a template, it's going to clear any progress you had on the previous one. It's not intended to do that. It's a bug, but it does do that. So be careful. I have all of my resamplers here. I can change that to world line. What tips? But that means if a sample doesn't sound right, if part of this doesn't sound right, you can change it to a different resampler. Super handy. And that expression is kind of unique, and it looks like this. So you basically want to go to your file where you keep all of your resamplers, and you want to right-click, rename, and just select all of it with the .exe and copy. Go into here and paste it in, and I've done that for all of these. You can open various different file formats, so it'll take a VSQX, UST, different MIDI formats, and USTX. Because you want to use a template, usually, in any case, I would go new from template and then just import. I would not use this open thing to open any UST files. I know I just said that it does it, but it's better to use these. So import tracks will let you import all of the same things. It'll just import it as a track instead of overriding the whole project, which means you get to keep your expressions that you set up, which is really nice. Import audio, again, you can just drag it in. Import MIDI, I don't know which one's better because I haven't actually touched these, but yeah, there you go. Export audio. So there are options. These two are just save and save as, but for the actual audio output. Mix down to WAV file. So what this does is it throws a compressor on everything and just churns it out. I would use it for work in progresses because it's going to squish everything together and might not sound very good. But if you don't know what mixing is and don't care, this is an option to just quickly get the audio result out. I would be careful with using this. I would basically have everything on a very low, not very low, but like a lower than usual volume, or I would set your computer volume very high so that you can hear if it's too loud, because the compressor will absolutely squish the shit out of it if it's too loud. I've heard it and it sounds like death. Export project basically lets you export the UST files or the MIDI files to share to other people, and then you can save and save as. Just to dispel the thing that I've been hearing a lot, people tend to say that OpenUTAU sounds worse than UTAU. This was the case maybe 3 months ago, but now you can use any WAV tool and any resampler, which means it will sound literally exactly the same as UTAU if you set it up right. If you want to use the WAV tool that comes with UTAU, you can do that. Like if you want to get the same sound out of it, you absolutely can. The only difference is if you're using this on Mac, obviously it's not going to sound exactly the same. You can only use MacRes and Weldline. MacRes is an external download you could get, better than basic Utau, which does not support Mac at all. Final thoughts. Right, so make sure you check the wiki. There's an OpenUTAU Discord. There's also a few other Utau related Discords. I wouldn't use the things that come up on Google very often because back in the day, they got a lot of clicks, they turn up on the top of Google, they are no longer relevant. A lot of the Utau wikis don't get any traction or attention anymore. You're probably better off finding a Discord to go to that can help you. AI banks and making banks are not necessarily related to OpenUTAU, so you can go to a general Utau Discord for that. If you have a change that you think you'd like to see in this program, we have areas in OpenUTAU where you can suggest it. I would make a thread in the ideas thing, but I'd also search to see if someone else has suggested something similar. It's no big deal if you suggest something someone's already said. It actually is nice to refresh what we've already got, but it can get a little frustrating, as you can imagine. So just keep that in mind. You'll see on the Discord we have a Trello bot which basically pops up and says, hey, check the Trello board because all the things we're working on is on the Trello board, so don't suggest it. Some things I want to mention since I'm drawing attention to the OpenUTAU server is please be patient. We're not a huge community. It might seem like we are, but a lot of the members of that server are just kind of lurkers. There's not a lot of people who actively do tech support and help people, so please be patient and polite. If you're really new to this and you want to ask for help but you're not sure how, the one thing I would recommend is learn how to take a screenshot. On Windows 10, there's this thing called snipping tool. It's super simple, super easy. You just hit new and then you just go blah and you take a screenshot. I know this has just been a huge information dump lecture, but I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to use my YouTube comments as a forum board. I think that's finally everything. Thank you for sticking with this for so long. Goodbye.